This looks like a job for the Batman. Riddler? You stealing my shtick?
I do it ice cold. You couldn't be further from the truth, detective.
I don't tell jokes.
Another voice in my head? Well, the more the merrier! Joker! Detective Bennett! Your Clayface?
One of Grundy's victims, and Grundy could come for us at any moment.
Destroy!
Name's Croc. Killer Croc.
The reach of Ragdoll is quicker than the eye.
I'm tracking a few leads.
Meow.
Excuse me?
Scandalous.
I'm the Batman. Bye-bye, Batman.
Try and find me, Batman. I'm just another face in the crowd.
You read ancient Egyptian?
The pictures help.
This is a continuation of my review and ranking of every episode from The Batman, a show that ran from 2004 to 2008. So far, I've only covered season 1, so go check that video out if you haven't. I'm going season by season, and it will culminate with a look back at the series as a whole and possibly a ranking of the seasons. And also a ranking of every last episode of the show. Share this video and show your love so that I can keep finding excuses to talk about this overlooked show. I think season 1 is great, every episode has been reviewed and ranked. Unlike last season though, there are no two-parters, so instead of 12 entries, there will be a full 13. Let's go ahead and jump into season 2.
Pleasant dreams, Alfred.
Oh, no dreams, sir.
We gon' rock the game. Again, they game, we game. But they are not the same.
In last place is The Butler Did It. This episode is basically just an acid trip, and it starts off with what seems like an Alfred trip. Alfred is committing burglary, and Bruce is shocked. He thinks it's all just a dream, but of course with anything superhero related, nothing is as it seems. Now I'm thinking of the Wizards of Waverly Place theme song. God damn it.
With dreams because everything is not what it seems.
Tell me more about this dream.
The opening to the episode is good enough, but it's basically all downhill from there. Once the kick-ass intro is over, it's played as a mystery of course, and Spellbinder is revealed as the villain, which in all honesty is always disappointing for me. I believe this is his only episode in the show, and I know Bruce Wayne has better villains than Terry McGinnis, okay? But Batman Beyond did this character so much better. It was still trippy, but there was a worthwhile story with him every time. He has some of my favorite episodes in Batman Beyond, and in this episode, it also just felt as if they wanted to use the Scarecrow, so Spellbinder was just a fill-in, which I can understand. The Bat embargo seriously screwed with this show when it came to the Rogues Gallery, but thankfully Batman has the best villains in all of comics, and this show did a fantastic job with what was given.
You look like a man who takes himself too seriously. For my opinion, you need to lighten up.
The Butler Did It is, however, my least favorite episode through this rewatch thus far. It's very unmemorable. Batman is brainwashed entirely too easily. I know you only have 20 minutes, and thank God this episode wasn't any longer, but some of the most brilliant writing I've seen is in that time frame. This episode obviously isn't a good representation of the show overall, and most shows have their fair share of bad ones. This was one of only a few in The Batman. Pets is a whole lot of nothing, but thankfully this is the last episode I'll be mentioning that I don't really enjoy. I rank it above The Butler Did It only because of the villains. You have the Penguin and Man-Bat, which is a pretty unique pairing. Man-Bat basically being a slave to the Penguin is extremely weird, but the scenes we get of Batman and Man-Bat are pretty good throughout, and they keep enough of my attention. Penguin is oddly the least interesting part of the episode. Even though he's controlling Man-Bat, I'm far more invested in what Man-Bat is going to do. I do wish we had more of Kirk Langstrom in human form this episode. We only get a few tiny glimpses of those human moments with him.
I am Dr. Kirk Langstrom, scientist, and one of the greatest minds in Gotham.
The entire subplot of a raccoon breaking into the Batcave is pretty ridiculous. It even gets to the point where the power in the Batcave goes out and Batman is left alone with no Alfred over the comms momentarily whilst battling Man-Bat. It was just kinda too goofy for me. I guess this episode was going for more of a comedic feel, but it really didn't work in this episode for me. It just doesn't fit the overall vibe of the season.
Wouldn't a blood bank be more your style, Langstrom?
Aside from being a team-up episode, of course, which I have yet to mention in this episode, but this is the first team-up episode I've mentioned, and there will be plenty more of them. Or not even necessarily team-up episodes, just episodes with multiple villains in it.
I think Penguin and I are through with pets for the time being.
How about a little game of chicken, Cajun style?
I had a good friend in New York City. He never called me by my name, just Hillbilly.
So at number 11 is Swamped. I really wish I could rate this episode higher for a few reasons. I love the Cajun Killer Croc, I love his theme, something about it just works. He's voiced by Ron Perlman, who is always a welcome addition to any show. Fun fact for anyone not aware, Ron Perlman also voiced Clayface in Batman the Animated Series and Slade in Teen Titans. He is actually a massive part of the DC family, voicing 3 separate DC villains. Also, he's always my Hellboy. We love you, Ron.
Have a beer.
No, my body is a temple.
Well, now it's an amusement park.
No. The glandular balance...
Just shut up and drink it, would you?
Listen, Mothball, there's only room for one killer here. That's Killer Croc.
I also love anytime Batman gets a new suit in this show. The water suit he's wearing in the back half of the episode is great. I still prefer the cold suit and the big chill from season 1, but it's a great looking suit, and it makes sense for story purposes. Killer Croc is trying to flood all of downtown Gotham.
Croc said today's flood was just a dry run.
If I wanted to do some big city croc hunting, where would I go?
That's kind of all this episode is, but it was still enjoyable. This version of Croc is distinct to itself, and I really do enjoy it. I have to mention that this design of the character does have a tail, which for some reason I just love when Killer Croc has a tail. It comes into play when he's taking on Batman this episode. It just adds to Croc's moveset and makes him feel more crocodile than man. There are plenty of things to enjoy in this episode. I just had a more fun time, or found more to appreciate in the episodes above it.
But I have just a thing to make 'em laugh. Die laughing, in fact!
You don't know me, you knew me. You thought Joker was a joke, that's just my life, this ain't no movie.
Kicking off the top 10 is the first of many Joker episodes this season, JTV, and I have to start this off by saying that Swamped could really give JTV a run for its money. They are extremely close for me, both weaker episodes in the season, but still fully enjoyable in their own right. This is probably one of the weaker Joker episodes, but most Joker episodes in the show are pretty damn good. The Yin stuff in this episode is very interesting.
I always watch my partner's back.
And something you will probably notice about this list is that she's involved in most of my higher ranked episodes. The connection that was formed between she and Batman at the end of season 1 is fully carried over to season 2, which I just love. There's already history, chemistry, and attachment that we have there, so to build upon that is genius. In this episode, Detective Yin gets a new partner though, Cash Tankinson, who is voiced by Patrick Warburton, who is most notable for the role of Joe Swanson in Family Guy.
No! I said I'm not hungry! Where is it now, huh? Where is it now?
And I love him as a voice actor. He has a very distinct voice, but I am not a big fan of Cash Tankinson as a character. He surprisingly will show up later again in the series, and I do hope I enjoy him more once I get back to that part of the show during this rewatch. Although I wasn't the biggest fan, he did serve his purpose in this episode, showcasing that Detective Yin's true new partner, after the Ethan Bennett tragedy, is in fact the Batman. As for Joker himself, he's the Joker. I don't really think the character is ever written poorly in this show.
And it premieres tonight on my very own pirate network, JTV!
Joker taking over the television broadcast is a classic trope at this point. It happened in Batman 89, multiple times in Batman the Animated Series, even in Justice League, and it's something I always enjoy. Joker is an absolute madman, and he wants all of Gotham, or even all the world, to see his work.
Look, I don't care who you are. You're not gonna... Gwynplaine Entertainment is the Joker.
Don't touch that remote.
The mayor's involvement in this is basically just being kidnapped by Mr. J, but it's a character worth mentioning because he's voiced by Adam West, which is some of the most phenomenal casting ever. Adam West as a mayor in a Batman show, thank God for the Batman.
I knew you'd employ your sneezing powder, so I took an anti-allergy pill.
Nurse, this woman is in labor.
Excuse me, I was here first. My leg is asleep.
Some are silk and some are leather. They're the faces of the stranger.
Finally getting into single digits here, number 9, Ragdolls to Riches. Okay, although my rankings may not indicate so, I am really enjoying Catwoman during this rewatch. She is definitely one of the best rogues in the show, honestly just one of the best characters overall. I've mentioned how I love her design in the show. It is the best villain design in the show, I think. It's one of the least drastic changes that the show did, but she looks amazing. The black suit and yellow goggles just fit the atmosphere and feel that the show exudes. But also, I think this is my favorite version of Catwoman after Michelle Pfeiffer to this point.
How could you? I'm a woman.
I'm sorry,
This is being recorded before the movie The Batman, so that is subject to change, as everything always is.
Selena, don't throw your life away.
Don't worry, honey. I got 9 of them.
Something this show has done an incredible job with is making Catwoman an anti-hero who still leans toward the side of crime more than she does good. You can tell that Selena is a good person deep down. I know this is nothing new with Catwoman, it's been part of her character forever, but a lot of times I don't think they do the best job managing the balance act with her character. It's one of the reasons Catwoman has never been among my favorite Batman villains. She's still a great character, I have just never loved her as much as many people do. In this show, however, up to this point in my rewatch, the Batman has managed to do it extremely well.
What do we have here?
Nope, they're not in here.
And the main reason her episodes have ranked on the lower side of things for me is due to reasons outside of her. This one being Ragdoll, and I don't hate Ragdoll, I think he's pretty okay. Definitely a character that fits the realm of animation, a massive upgrade from, say, Spellbinder, but honestly, as for Batman and Catwoman, this is kinda just like the first Catwoman episode again, but with Ragdoll instead of ninjas. For Bruce and Selena, however, things do go a little further, and that's what I love about this episode. I really enjoy the Selena Alfred dynamic as well. I think that's worth mentioning just because it's something we don't get all that often. Overall, it's a solid episode that I'll never mind rewatching.
Finders keepers?
They don't belong to you.
Who then? Bruce Wayne?
You've been tearing me apart, rip me little by little. I don't even want to start trying to solve all your riddles.
I feel wrong for having Night in the City this low at number 8. I feel like this placement is the one that most people would disagree with. It is a pretty highly regarded episode of the show. I think the ambition of this episode is the reason for its slight downfall. That's not the greatest word to use because it's still a very good episode. It just has so much going on that 20 minutes isn't enough. This would have benefited from being a 2-parter similar to the last 2 episodes of Season 1. This episode throws everything at the wall and I think more of it hits than doesn't, but I do have some hangups preventing it from being higher in my ranking.
Thought you could use some good press.
First, let's just talk about everything that this episode includes. 3 of the big 4 Batman villains, Joker, Penguin, and Riddler. That in itself is more than enough for a 20-minute episode in my opinion. But we also have the GCPD full-on hunting Batman, and the introduction of one James Gordon. Not to mention Batman teaming with Detective Yin for the entire runtime. She loses her badge, and also, this episode ends with the freaking introduction of the bat signal.
How do we call him? He gave us a signal!
And setting up Batgirl for Season 3, which is a great way to end the season, but there is a ridiculous amount of stuff happening in this episode, and I think it's to its detriment, but it does have plenty to enjoy, and nothing is terrible, just a little disappointing. I'll touch on the GCPD stuff first before I go on my "this is the worst Riddler episode of the show" tangent.
You and me work together? I'm into riddles, not jokes.
I really do like Batman and Badgeless Yin versus the GCPD element. I enjoy Gordon enough, he's not center stage of this episode or anything, so there wasn't really enough to judge his overall character in the show, but from what was presented in this episode, they got Gordon right. He was never really against Batman, and that's obvious from the first moment he's on screen. He gets Yin her badge back in the end, and Yin is great as she always is. I love how much of her and Batman working together we get to see in this episode. I enjoy the dynamic between the two a bit more in other episodes, but it's still great here and probably the best aspect of the episode. It's very disappointing that we didn't get to see it continue in future seasons though. Detective Yin is basically gone entirely after this episode, which is always upsetting. As I mentioned earlier, we get the introduction of the bat signal at the end of this episode. It seems to me that whenever they introduce a bat signal in anything, it's always a great moment. Just because it's obviously such an iconic part of Batman's mythos, the ending is also very reminiscent of the ending to Batman Begins, which makes sense with this episode premiering merely months after the film's release.
Armed robbery, double homicide. Got a taste for the theatrical like you. Leaves a calling card.
All I ask is that you help me make Gotham a safe place for my daughter to grow up in.
But not only do we get the bat signal, but we also get the setup to Batgirl for Season 3, which I thought was nice. It's a simple but smart and effective way to begin introducing the Bat family.
Partners.
Now I've saved what brings this episode down in the rankings for last, and that is the villains, which I hate saying because it's the freaking Joker, Riddler, and Penguin. They are all fine overall, but this is a weaker villain episode. I really wanted more from an episode involving three of Batman's most legendary villains. The Joker and the Riddler being my two favorite Batman villains ever, and this oddly being one of their very few on-screen appearances together post-1966.
Are you pompous, puffed up penguin? Our friends make peace. Have a shake on me.
I just can't help but crave more from it. The entire concept of this episode is that much like the GCPD, Joker, Riddler, and Penguin are hunting Batman, and they are hunting him because of a deal they made to rule Gotham, which is a fine setup and all, but I would have preferred something more creative with an episode this big. This doesn't match up well compared to the Season 1 finale, which wouldn't be so disappointing if it wasn't three of the biggest fucking Batman villains. And the only villain I really want to talk about to an extent is the Riddler. The other two have and will continue to be covered repeatedly over the course of this series. Joker and Penguin are fine, both characters have better episodes, they both have worse episodes as well. They are the two most used villains in the show by a pretty large margin, Joker especially, but the Riddler is in only 3 episodes of this show, and this is by far the worst one, which is fine because this is still a good episode, which means the show never did his character wrong per se, but this is the most wrong he was done. If there is a main villain of this episode, it's the Riddler.
Lost my last chance to not be the Riddler.
But his character is just a little off in this episode. I know that Riddler isn't used much in any Batman series really because he's a difficult character to write, but I also know that this show can write the Riddler. And firstly, he didn't even tell that many riddles in this episode. It undoubtedly pales in comparison to his debut episode that we'll be discussing later on. This applies to all the villains, not only the Riddler, and it is definitely because of the limited screen time. Each of them, Riddler, Joker, Penguin, seem a bit too incompetent at times. And it's because the show has to wrap everything it's trying to do up in the span of only 20 minutes. So yeah, I think the villains are the biggest indicator here that this episode wasn't long enough. I think it would have greatly benefited from being a 2-parter, but it still is a very enjoyable and good episode overall, so I don't want to complain too much. I mean, it's still 3 of Batman's biggest villains. I still had a good time with this episode. They just tried to do a little too much with the runtime they were given.
What?
How am I part of this? You'll see.